All right, folks, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to shift things a little bit and just talk about the topic of loss and grief a little bit more directly. We've been talking through these series of videos about forms of loss that might be a little bit more low-key. There might be things that you might not necessarily qualify or suspect as loss, so loss of financial stability, loss of control, loss of ability to plan, loss of your daily cadence, things like that. I'm going to shift gears now and just talk through the more direct understanding of grief and loss, because this is going to be a reality for a lot of you out there in terms of having to suffer actual loss, meaning observing death, observing loss of loved ones. And that might be because of COVID-19. It might be because of other reasons that are going on as well, just other causes of loss and death and so forth. But something I wanted to be able to dedicate this video for is to understand how we go through the grieving process, and to make a distinction as well. And I made reference of this in one of my past videos before about how I went through loss and grief, and how when a person goes through loss, say if you lose a loved one, you lose a parent, a spouse, or a child, someone close to you, that it can feel like a very isolating experience, because you at that moment in time are one of the only few people that are going through that specific loss, while the rest of the world continues to move on and works through their life on a day-to-day kind of normal basis. You are still stuck in a place of loss, having to observe all that's changed, all that's been taken away. And that's a hard thing. The distinction here for a lot of us, as it relates to coronavirus, is, and especially if we start looking at the death counts, and we start looking at the toll that it's taking, not just in America, but around the world, and we look at the numbers in terms of the amount of life lost, there is a communal grief. There's a need to take a moment of pause and just to be able to understand that the world is hurting. And if it doesn't impact you directly, meaning you haven't had to feel the direct effects of loss of life for yourself, you probably are a lot closer to it, meaning you probably have 1 or 2 degrees of separation from someone who's experiencing that kind of death and loss. And so there's a sense of communal grief that goes on. And in fact, I talked a little bit about this in a blog post I pushed out a while ago, observing how a lot of America, a lot of the U.S., and even the world observed the death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter. And that's a kind of a strange thing to kind of bring up right now, but the dynamics are the same, because when the community grieves together and we observe that there's a sense of joint loss, there's a certain level of healing that happens communally as well. And so one of the things I wanted to do is to be able to underscore that and say, hey, that's part of this process that we're all going through, that we're all suffering loss and experiencing some form of loss to death in similar ways. And to be able to create room to mourn well, that we give each other space and validate the space to simply say that it's okay to hurt. It's okay to weep. It's okay to feel all the different feelings that you have about that, and to do it together. The minute we start trying to fix or to invalidate or to minimize, that's when communal grief stops. And that's one thing I've observed, that perhaps American society doesn't do nearly as well, that we could be doing better, is observing how to sit in pain and suffering and loss together. That in a society where we generally try to move towards comfort and wellness and happiness, sitting in pain and loss is a little bit harder for us to do. And so this is one of the things that I think is going to challenge us, and it might be a real growth process for a lot of us to know how to grieve communally together, that we can stop and observe there's real suffering out there. And to take a different perspective on it altogether. That was true before COVID-19. It's just that it hits a lot closer to home now. And so there's a way for us to be able to observe that the world hurts and the world suffers, and there are people and around us, near us, that suffer every single day, and to grieve with one another and to sit with one another through the pain and suffering is part of the healing process. And so I just wanted to include that as part of the global understanding of what it is that we're doing here. A lot of anxiety that people are feeling is just kind of bumping along the surface of that pain and grief, and not knowing really how to kind of dive into it. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that we can do through an experience like this is to be able to know, okay, this is kind of the deeper end of the pool, and we don't have to skip across it like a rock along the surface, but we can allow ourselves to dive in and to sit in that suffering, that pain well, and to observe loss together. And when we're doing it together, we're not doing it in isolation, it feels much more tolerable. It feels like it's more possible to do because we're not in it alone. and that's how we heal together. And so we don't have to skip along, we can actually dive in. And so the anxiety lessens because we're no longer trying to avoid that space. We can actually move into it a little bit more and to feel more stable, more secure, more in connection with other people as we do it. So that's the point of this video, is to encourage you and to remind you that we are all going through a sense of communal suffering together, and that's not a bad thing. If we allow it to be that way and to move in that space, it can be a very healing, restorative, and connecting experience for a lot of people. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that helps. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.